afternoon, everyone. I'm Kalpa Vithalani. I'm on the executive board for BioForward, and I'm also a licensing manager at the Medical College of Wisconsin, where we hosted one of Vice President Biden's regional cancer moonshot summits. As is very, very evident here today, after today's incredible summit, I know that a healthier future starts right here in Wisconsin. Today's discussions, as you've seen, have touched on every part of the Cancer Moonshot mission to support patients, to improve care and increase access, to unleash new breakthroughs, which we're doing right here, free track data, and help find new cures, which we're also doing right here. We'll hear from our esteemed panel about how we're moving away from we to me, and how the Cancer Moonshot and big data will help us focus on the most effective treatment for an individual. I'm honored and thrilled to introduce our moderator, Umberto Tachinardi. He is Chief Information Officer for Biohealth, Carbone Cancer Center, Chorom, President and founder of Lynx Bio, and Andy DeLaO, Marketing Director for GE Healthcare. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. My name, as mentioned, is Umberto Tachinardi. I am the director of informatics for the cancer center here, the Carbone, the Comprehensive Cancer Center, Carbone. And we are very pleased to have one of the first cancer NCI designated cancer centers in the nation. Back when there was only 6, now there are 44. For a long time, we actually had 2 NCI designated cancer centers here. Now we merged those 2 into one. And we see 30,000 patients a year for cancer alone, and definitely do the whole spectrum of cancer, from prevention, basic biology on cancer, to the treatment and imaging. We have some interesting and important outcomes in our past, like a Nobel Prize in 1970, Dr. Tannen, that got the Nobel Prize for proving the connection between viruses and cancers. So we are a group of researchers that is used to explore the boundaries of trying to beat cancer. And I am very glad to have distinguished colleagues here this afternoon, and I will let them introduce themselves, their companies, and what their areas of interest in this is, and then we're going to keep this discussion forward. Andy?
So, my name is Andy DeLaO. I'm the marketing director at GE Healthcare. So, at GE, kind of what we think when it comes to cancer is there's a couple of different segments. There's sort of the before I have cancer, there's the time in which you're trying to understand if you do have cancer, and then there's the time after you have cancer and what life means after that. And so from our perspective, what we're trying to do is make our investments into our research and our development so that we can impact each of those segments, because at the end of the day, that's the most important segments of people, or when they become patients, of their lives. And the future that we see is, it's really about going from we care to me care and being able to deliver care at the end of one, but with scale.
Sure.
My name is Chorom. I got my PhD here at UW-Madison, and actually I spun out my own company called Lynx Biosciences out of that same graduate work. We develop tools to predict how cancer patients will respond to therapy. I'm also in charge of research and clinical development at Cellectar Biosciences, where we're developing targeted radiotherapeutics for cancer therapy.
So we have 3 UW connected people here on the stage. I'm very pleased with that. So I think our challenge for this hour is to explore what is this challenge, and we all saw the call for action from the Vice President on the Moonshot Initiative. And of course, those are political buzzwords, but there is meaning behind that, and Andy already, well, both colleagues here already referred to actions in making a more personalized, more targeted, more precise medicine. And I think our area, cancer, for instance, is certainly a great area to start with, but it's certainly not the only one. We are talking about the whole spectrum of diseases and health, since living better is probably what we are all aiming at. We saw some discussion before our panel on several aspects of how healthcare is evolving, the opportunities, the business opportunities, etc. But I think the precision side of medicine is certainly one of those topics that raise more attention, and because the challenges are so new in some aspects, it attracts more interest in investments and development. So I saw people mentioning in one of the two previous panels the data issue. So we're talking about a medicine that depends on data. And I would like to ask my partners in crime here to share their visions on this data thing. I mean, from collection and analysis, and what is your vision of that, and how does that connect to this new medicine we're talking about?
Yeah, so I think the way that GE Healthcare thinks about data is in a couple of different buckets. So first you need to be able to connect to the data. Then you need to be able to collect all of that data, and then it's all about disrupt. So how do we take that data and how do we develop the clinical and actionable insights at the right point of time so that you get the right diagnosis at the right time for the right patient, which you can then get into the right treatment. And so what we're doing is we're looking at a couple of different, aspects of care. So we're looking at it from a diagnostic imaging perspective. We're looking at it from a pathology perspective, and how you sort of take those two worlds and that information, and how do you pair it up together, and how do you start seeing, the similarities in certain patients with certain different genotypes. They've got certain different contributing or comorbidities, and then down to the zip code level. Because as we all know, social determinants of health, it's more about where you live than anything. And so once you start pairing genomic with where you live, that's where a lot of this magic starts to formulate. I think the other thing that we're really looking at from the biosciences, the life sciences perspective is really about that personalized care. What about if we imagine the future that it's not one single pill to cure all people? What about if it's 7 billion different types of pills to cure each person? And so things like immunotherapy, and how do you take those T cells, and how do you extract them and reprogram, and then how do you grow? That entire process, that takes a lot of time. And so what we're looking at is how do we make those footprints smaller, how do we make it more affordable, and how do we accelerate that time and that speed? And then once we have that information, how do you collect that, and how do you start sharing it broadly so that you can get the innovations and you can get the speed to market that I think everyone here has been talking about?
I think you bring up obviously some really, really great points, and the way that Lynx Biosciences is tackling that area is from a slightly different angle, but towards the same goal, really trying to go towards that personalized medicine, which does sound like a buzzword, and it's a term that's been around for a really long time, but we really need to actually start moving towards it. And the way that Lynx Biosciences has been trying to tackle that is exactly that idea of we to me. Everyone is so different from one another, each cancer, since we're on the topic of cancer, each cancer type is so different from other cancer types. And even within a type of cancer, all the patients are very different. So we have to treat them very much as an individual as opposed to empirically, which is how we treat a lot of cancers today. So what we're trying to do is develop these tests or diagnostics, otherwise called companion diagnostics, that go alongside different cancer therapies to predict how patients will actually respond to those therapies before receiving them. So rather than using the patient as a guinea pig, you use, for example, a standard of care biopsy from that patient, test that, figure out which drugs the patient will likely respond to, and only put the patient on those therapies. And this can be, this is not just a one-shot process. This can be performed throughout the duration of the disease, so that as the disease and the patient evolves, you can evolve the test along with the patient. So that's our main goal, is to be able to truly actually individualize treatment for these patients and work alongside other efforts like medical imaging, other big data that you can gather from that and put it all together and move towards that same vision.
Yeah, so this is an interesting beginning of this conversation, because I can see there is a lot of ground to cover. You just described a lot in few words, but a lot of ground. I'm remembering now when we started to see those translational grants called CTSAs. We had this motto, cheaper, faster, better. And what we are probably talking about is the science of one needs to be cheaper, faster, better, or it will not happen. Because one, it's limited to one's lifetime. So if it is the science of one, the person needs to be alive to benefit from that life. So ultimately, the lifetime is our limit. But we certainly need to do much faster than that to be efficient. And so I think scale and control of the time of that scale is certainly an important part of our business. So I would like some words on that side. I mean, how do you see us being able to do things as complex as the ones we're talking about, faster, better, cheaper?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had the fortune of, I've kind of been on the provider side, on the research side, now I'm on the vendor side of the spectrum. And I think what GE sort of has in their arsenal is they're really good at that people and that process perspective, and technology is just in their DNA. And so what we're good at doing is innovating around that space and being able to get to the bigger, better, faster, cheaper, technology that we can then partner and enable. I think where we're evolving is in that innovation space. So who are the partners, who are the collaborators that we decide to marry up with, so that we can understand the research from your perspective or the compendium diagnostics that you're developing, and sort of where that fits in the space and what your big challenges are, so that way that's where we innovate, and that's where we sort of place our R&D budget, so that we can take that time limiting factor, give you more time back, and do it in a way that's affordable, so that we can start getting that scale.
So actually that motto you said, the cheaper, faster, better, that's exactly what we're striving for, because in order to actually be clinically utilized, you have to keep those three criteria in mind, and we really try to work with that criteria in mind. So we designed our assay or companion diagnostic to fit into the clinical workflow, so that it is with the standard of care biopsy. You don't have to take an additional painful biopsy. It's extremely rapid. You have a turnaround time of 3 days. And the cheaper portion is the fact that if we are successful, we can potentially eliminate ineffective therapies from being utilized, which cost upwards of $100,000 per regimen. for cancer therapies. And that's what we're really striving towards, is to avoid that, avoid the unwanted side effects that come with those, and in its place be able to upfront figure out which of those therapies will actually work. And we're not the only ones trying to work towards this. This is a very much a thriving area where people are really trying to develop these tests that can be performed for each patient and try to start individualizing. But those criteria, they're very, very important to actually make us be utilized. And if we can't fall into those, we definitely will not be.
So I'm happy that we have this composition for this panel, because if we can see that science in a more traditional way, it's certainly not the only way, but in a more traditional way, kind of starts in an academic environment, even if it's in a company, but the environment, it's kind of a scientific academic environment. And then we have two great examples. I mean, there is a big company like GE, I mean, huge company that builds everything, from everything to everything. And we have a startup that, or a smaller, not a startup anymore, but a smaller company that has all the potential to move all the way up to anywhere. So how this is probably the best equilibrium for our system here, is to have this continuous. We need to have companies that know how to distribute and produce at large scales. We need to have the zoomed in, innovative and bleeding edge knowledge available to make those things happen. So I would like, from your perspectives, to see how do you see the potential to collaborate this triangle and what GE, for instance, is used to do, and in your case, your company. We can switch order here.
Do you want to start first and then I'll...
Yep.
Sure, of course. So, yep, we're the baby company. So we started not too long ago, actually. But this is something that I do feel very passionately about, is that we really need to continue this startup ecosystem that we have in Wisconsin. And at the core, as you mentioned, it is really academia. This is where new ideas come out of, and we begin to innovate, and we need to work on helping that translate and more easily transition into a startup company. And I do think that we are working towards that, and we're trying to be one of those. But it's definitely a very interesting area to be, and we definitely, our goal is to partner, because, well, you can't really do everything yourself. And oftentimes the larger company will have more resources, more funding, and the know-how to be able to help you out and continue along the same goal. So, for example, for us, a potential partner would be a pharmaceutical company who are developing those cancer therapeutics but aren't as well versed on the diagnostic side. So I think it is very important for startups, larger companies, as well as academia to all exist and collaborate together to move both innovative ideas forward as well as grow them in the future.
Yeah, I think from GE's perspective, there's this internal renaissance. GE has also been known as, they're a company with great leaders in leadership. And so over the past few months, there's been a renaissance in our own culture on how do we make sure that we've got that same startup mentality? How do we sort of understand what's around the corners and what's happening in that white space? And what does that future look like? And how do we get there? And who are the right partners and collaborators to have to place in these bets? I think as an example, a few years ago, GE went ahead and decided that they were going to invest $1 billion over 5 years for R&D for cancer. So to this point in time, we're slightly over, $500 million invested. And some of those partners also happens to be on the venture side. So someone like Moderator, who is, backed by GE Ventures, which is another part of GE. But what they're doing is they're actually looking at, chronic conditions, whether it's obesity or cardiac diagnosis, and potentially sometime in the future maybe cancer. But what they're doing and what they're realizing is that outcomes actually are measured and happen inside the body. And so for a company like us, that's really interesting because that's new science and that's new technology and that's a new way of thinking about that space and how do you manage those costs. And so for us, we want to partner and back a company like that. And so that's kind of the way that we view sort of this new world is that yes, some of the innovation is going to come from us, but a lot of that innovation is going to come up from the startup world. It's going to come from research. It's going to come from the academics. It's going to come from, untraditional business partners that we typically aren't used to seeing in healthcare that partners with an academic. And they go to market a lot quicker. And so how do we come in there and how do we help them make sure that they've got the acumen and they've got the regulatory ability and they've got the advantage of the scale and the business acumen that we can bring to them.
Yeah, so I will get back to the data part because that's something I know a little bit more about. And it's so obvious when we see others presenting along the day and what we are discussing here. So the part of probably the glue that connects all of us is data in so many senses. And I'm happy to see that we have many companies taking care of multiple aspects of this business. People are worrying about security, providing technology for security, for data generation, for data storage, for analyzing data, and stuff like that. I think how we share knowledge and share information will probably need to improve if we're going to do this faster, better, cheaper. We will need to introduce probably a lot more a kind of a forgotten element and the critical element of our business, which are the patients. And I would like to talk a little bit about that because we need to, in my opinion, part of this business is to empower the patients and make them part of this business. And we don't have all the solutions that are necessary to make that in a great scale and make it right. So maybe some comments on your visions on how in the different sides of the business we can improve in doing that.
Yeah, so I'm going to slightly switch hats. So yes, I work for GE, and what I'm trying to sort of build, just based on my own personal background, inside of the company and those that we collaborate with, is that patient voice. Because at the end of the day, there is no greater expert in your own diagnosis or your own disease than you as the patient. And what I've found through building cancer centers and hospitals and my own research is that there's 4 commonalities that all patients share. It's really about you need to spend the time with them to build and earn their trust, to be able to have a transparent and open conversation. And then it's about managing the transitions. And so if we fundamentally all understand and recognize that, the opportunity becomes limitless. So someone like a GE that has, plenty of hospital partners, we've got research partners, we have businesses from energy and gas to, locomotives. Everyone around the world is an opportunity to connect with. And so how do we start connecting with those people and having meaningful conversations and dialogue? And how do we collect that information systematically so that we start seeing the commonalities and we start seeing some insights? And then how do we get that and start to share that with the startups and with the incubators and the accelerators and the academics? And so from my perspective, that's where I really sort of see the future happening. And I think the other sort of opportunity is that with, you know, the computers that we all have in our front pocket or in our coats, it allows patients to connect with anyone that they want to in the world. And they're eager to share their story. So from my perspective, I think it's a huge opportunity.
I think that's really interesting because you take this rather very large, nearly global view of this data collection, and I think that is very, very interesting. So what I am more used to is actually the complete opposite, but it's about, again, collecting more information. This ties very neatly into the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, which is basically to collect more information about each patient so we can move towards that individualized medicine. And one of that is to collect information, like you suggest, and the other, and to be able to share it, which is a huge hurdle as of now, as you mentioned, the privacy portion, but those are maybe not simple hurdles, but they're hurdles that we'll have to get over, because at the end of the day, it does seem like patients want to be in more control of what is happening to them. They want to understand their own personal disease as much as possible, and they want to be able to share that information with, for example, clinicians and other researchers to be able to move innovation forward and be able to ultimately help more people like themselves. And so what we are definitely striving to do is drill down into each patient, not only just figure out what their responses to certain therapies might be, but to learn more about their disease. We're taking that standard of care biopsy, so now we've got a little snapshot of their cancer, and now we can begin to learn more about each individual patient, the genetics, the protein signature, etc., the biology of all these patients. And that does, again, translate back into all this data that's generated, and how can we understand that data and make sense of it at a certain point. So it does actually tie neatly back together.
Mm-hmm.
We just pictured a word that depends on skills that we probably miss currently in large scale. We probably have a little bit here and there, but we're talking about a big change that will require better educated people in those new things. Not that people are not educated right now, well, maybe. But we certainly need a different thinking there, and that thinking needs to be backed by proper education. And I think this is one of the challenges coming from the academic side, and one of the big challenges we see is how we prepare or play our role in preparing that workforce for the future, which is today, that can tackle those things that we're talking about here, the privacy issues, the big data issues, the N of one science, and the healthcare around the patient as opposed to around the healthcare system, and so many other things. So I think the question was asked before, but I would like to see that also discussed by our panel here. How do you see the challenge from your perspectives in terms of that workforce that we need to run this precision medicine world?
Yeah, I think, I think it's either between 2020 and 2025. Will be the first time that we have all 5 generations in the workforce at one. And so you have to think about the fact that you've got this vast majority of wisdom and knowledge locked in, the leadership ranks, the academic ranks of those that are, 65 and older. And so how do you fundamentally transfer that knowledge in a way that those that happen to be, in the millennials and afterwards can unlock and can tap into that, but can do it in a way that brings the meaning that they're looking for, and then how do all 5 of those generations and sort of their own unique traits, how do they culturally work together towards this vision? And I think something with the Moonshot Challenge is ripe for that. I think fundamentally, cancer affects all of us. I think fundamentally, all of the various generations have their own skill sets, and when we can actually come together around one sort of focus or challenge, I think great things are going to happen. It's just about making sure that we've got all the right people around the table, and then we start by listening versus talking. Because when we listen and we define the problem and the challenge, that's when we can identify the right solution.
I absolutely agree with that. And it will definitely, I mean, that was a very huge, that wasn't just one question that you brought up. I mean, those are huge questions that will need to be answered in the future to move any of this forward. And they will involve governmental, regulatory, reimbursement changes in the future that will take time, but they will need to occur for any of that to happen, and it will have to involve collaboration across all fronts. People listening in pharma, biotech, academia, other parts of industry, in order to get that all moving together. And one of our biggest challenges moving forward is actually probably that regulatory and reimbursement landscape for us. Companion diagnostics are still a very new and evolving field that is becoming more and more regulated. It is definitely regulated by the FDA, but in terms of reimbursement, pricing strategies, those are still all rather up in the air, and they do define which drugs work and which don't. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we just all have to come together and come to an agreement that this is beneficial for everybody, and most of all the patients. And those dialogues need to begin happening. And I'm sure they've started, but they need to continue, and we need to actually begin to change things. And it's also applicable to the data that we mentioned about privacy issues. Something needs to be modified in that sense so that we can have this sharing of information without compromising patient confidentiality to an extent. But it all comes back to that listening and collaborative effort, and we just have to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think one thing that's going to be interesting is I know Susanna Fox in HHS Idea Labs recently announced that any, I believe, research grant that receives $10 million of back funding, that their data is going to have to now become open, and it's going to have to be shared. And so I think it's things like that are going to accelerate it, but I think the big challenge is going to become, what's the governance structure? Who governs it? How does it get governed? How do you make sure that it is de-identified? I think the topic around intellectual property and who owns it. I think when you start thinking of earlier panels when they're talking about cognitive computing and algorithms, those are all patents that are being filed. And so as the research opens up and you start to share it, and you've got these privacy issues, but now you've got patents and IPs, and you've got academics and medical technology or biopharmaceutical companies, there's a lot of governance issues that I think come up that I think holistically we haven't had the open dialogue, and now's the sort of the tipping point. We need to start now. We need to be open and transparent, so that way we've got the right governance and we've got the right thought process, so that we're protecting us while still benefiting the patient and the research.
So let me continue on this topic a little bit more and see. So let's imagine this future where we are able now to have the Umberto's pill. So instead of having a population-based pill, but my pill, and you're going to produce that.
Just,
Right? So let's play a little bit, what do we need to create Umberto's pill and be that pill efficient, not only in treating a disease, but preventing? Or maybe the pill will not be a pill. It will be a set of things. Could be preventative things and the right lifestyle changes and stuff like that. But there will be also a pill. And right now, a pill takes how many years and how many $1 billion to get approved, and how many people we need to engage in things. But in the N of one, those are different. This is a different game. So how do you see this game being played?
so actually that point you mentioned towards the end about how much time it takes for a pill or therapy to come from conception all the way to market and approval, it does take an incredible amount of money and time and effort. And I think one of the ways that, and it is actually one of the Cancer Moonshot initiatives, it's kind of buried in there, is to develop better preclinical models. Right now we rely on these systems that have been in place for the past 50 years, decades, and they're really not relevant models of humans, let alone individual humans. So we need to begin to make better models that will predict better, more efficiently which cancer drugs are actually worth taking all the way through R&D and clinical trials. And then by doing so, you'll reduce that time and effort to get to, or you may increase the amount that actually end up going to FDA approval. And then coupling that with more tests. And just learning more about an individual person, all those details which feed back into that big data idea. We just need to begin learning more about each individual person and how those details, which ones are actually relevant and which ones can actually help guide decisions and move that forward and figure out which Umberto pill to give you. Because it will likely not just be one Umberto pill. It'll be 50,000 over the course of your lifetime. But yeah, trying to give you Umberto pill and not Andy pill.
So, Andy, let me twist a little bit the question and move that more to the diagnostic technology side, which is one of the many things that GE does. But there is an equivalent burden in developing and testing and approving new equipment, new algorithms. You just mentioned it. If we need to have pipelines developed on a personalized base or almost a one-off, what changes are needed in our business or the regulation side?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different answers to that question. I think the first thing is we've all heard GE talk about the digital industrial. And so one of the things that started in power and gas that's now coming over to healthcare is something called the digital twin. And so what that is that's basically a digital copy of every physical asset. And so as you do that, you can start to test, you can start to tweak, you can start to add or take away different things in that digital space, and then you can simulate and project out what may or may not happen based on that digital copy of it. And so I think from a time to market and R&D perspective going through the FDA, what we're starting to do is we're starting to see how we have more open and sort of transparent conversations earlier in that development process to kind of say this is the target or this is where we think we go, that can potentially sort of accelerate that time to market. I think in addition to that, whether it's diagnostic imaging equipment or if it's our life sciences business and biopharma, I think fundamentally the regulatory thing, it's a system that we've had since, the FDA was originally created. There hasn't been a lot of innovation in that space, and I think it's going to take a collective majority just sit down, educate, and try to work through what that future looks like. Because if we really want to get to the Umberto pill at the N of 1, and we want to do that for 300 million people, that's a lot of FDA regulatory approval time. And so I think we need to sort of figure that out. But I think from a diagnostic perspective, that's one of the ways that we're doing it is by using sort of this digital copier, or what we call the digital twin.
So we're getting to the final 5 minutes of our panel here. So I will ask you to give your final words. From my perspective, I think this is a generally important triangle that we need to keep operating and alive. So sustainability is certainly an important, but it needs to be a moving fast sustainability. It can't be something that takes years. We'll need to be very creative about how we keep that wheel spinning. I think as an academic organization, it's clear that we need to play our duty on making sure we are training the right force, we are putting the right research questions, we are exploring everything, but at the same time we are keeping a scientific side of that. So we can't do that based on instinct only. We really need to make it right. We're talking about lives and very important things. So I invite you to give your final thoughts here.
Sure. So I think we are poised, as you mentioned, to enter into this era of change and moving forward towards that individualized care, being able to actually understand those large volumes of data, but it will take a huge collective effort across multiple bodies. And really what that will entail is an attitude from everybody that basically you have to go from an attitude of that's been around in place for so long. It's easier just to stick with it. It's too difficult to change. I'm just going to say no because it's too difficult. To an attitude of we have to change this. We can figure out a way, and we're going to work together. And I think that mindset is easier to say, as you mentioned. It's easier to talk about, but to actually listen to other people and actually implement those types of behaviors is very hard. And I think that'll be one of our biggest hurdles moving forward. Is making sure everyone is on that same page of taking action, actually trying to change large things and innovating in areas such as the regulatory process, which is going to take a huge amount of momentum, changing the reimbursement process, things like that. And we really just need to change that mindset. And I think we're ready, and it sounds like everyone is trying to strive towards that goal. So it's definitely an exciting time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, it's exactly what you said. I think, fundamentally, we all change. Things change. I think the velocity in which that change happens needs to continue to pick up, and it's going to be more and more forceful, and we're going to have to figure out how collectively we work together to accelerate that and sort of get to this vision that we have. I think the other thing is that while I agree, we need to be very specific in not doing any harm and not causing any harm because people and lives are at stake. We also have to take the rule book and the cookbook and we need to throw it out because there's new rules for a new world and they haven't been written yet. And so I think that really becomes the opportunity is when you bring the patients, the providers, the physicians, you bring the payers, you bring the politicians, you bring the big pharma and the medical technology companies together, and you start to talk about what that change looks like and what the new rules could be. That's when I think magic's going to happen, and that's when we're going to get the velocity and the power to move in days and weeks versus years and decades.
So this is definitely a team work. It's a team science. It's team business. We need to do it right, and we're going to do that. Thank you very much